Right, she's 77 years old, took part in a protest against oil by blocking the M25 and was released from jail just before Christmas. But Gay Delap has been returned to jail because an electronic tag couldn't be fitted to her ankle because of her deep vein thrombosis. Her supporters say it's cruel. The government says it's just policy. So I'm asking, what do you think? It's Christmas after all. Couldn't an alternative be found? Or is it right the campaigner goes back to prison? Well, Fiona Atkinson is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil.
How can anybody say they're from a system that practices justice when they're putting a peaceful, elderly, ill woman in prison over Christmas because of their own ineptitude? How can that ever be described as justice? And this is a woman who was taking responsibility, who was taking an action in order to move a government to doing what they should be doing, which is protecting their citizens. The least they could do now is to protect this particular citizen from their own ineptitude, i.e. not being able to come up with an electronic tag for someone who just happens to have thin wrists. It's outrageous.
Well, give us a call on this one. So, were you one of those who was disrupted when Just Stop Oil protesters blocked the M25 back in 2022? Or is it just plain cruel to send this grandmother back to prison because the electronic tag couldn't fit onto her wrists? Give us a call. Let's talk to Addy now in Northumberland. Morning, Addy.
I'm just talking about the situation of the
protesters
lady who has been returned to prison.
What do you make of that?
I was saying to your researcher that effectively the sentence was in excess in the first place. To my mind, it should have been a suspended sentence, given all of the factors. Because at the end of the day, apparently from the court is there to serve a purpose. Now, the purpose is to be a deterrent and also to make the person aware of the seriousness of their undertaking. Now, then, she will obviously, by going to court, that was brought home to her. Therefore, the deterrent should have been a suspended sentence whereby it was made quite clear to her that if she got involved in anything of a similar nature, so therefore the court was able to make that as narrow or as broad as they liked. And basically, if she crossed that threshold, then she would go to jail. Now then, immediately she would be aware of all of those circumstances. Therefore, if she got involved in any other similar activity that was stipulated, then she would go to jail. Simple as. No sympathy, no nothing. Because
was this maybe
she would have known exactly what she was doing.
Was this
and what the
sentence?
Were.
This 20-month sentence, maybe it was a potential deterrent to stop protesters blocking the M25. I mean, this happened in 2022, and I've reported on many of these actions, if you like, from this group over the years, and people do get quite angry with them and disrupted, and this was potentially a deterrent, and she was released early in time for Christmas. It's just that this electronic tag now doesn't fit her wrists, so they can't monitor her. So the MOJ have said that if offenders could not be monitored in the community electronically, they would be returned to prison, even if it was no fault of their own. So what do you make of that?
Well, effectively, because that's basically the task of the Ministry of Justice. Therefore, I would have said that an appeal should be heard rapidly, because I'm pretty sure a session for the appeal review committee could be held just with one single judge to look at that one single question. Now, then,
and I'm sure maybe Monday will come and the MOJ and all those round will look at this and think, okay, maybe they'll make an exception. Maybe she'll be home in time for Christmas. But
yeah,
it's one of those that it sounds. I mean, the computer says no, she needs to be monitored, and the tag doesn't work. So therefore,
no, and that's not the MOJ's fault, is it? Law, because the judges have to stand by the rules of law. One of the rules of law is natural justice. They sworn a promissory oath, which is legislation from 1868 that states they must be fair. So therefore, with natural justice and the need to be fair, would be the outcome would be that rather than putting her back in jail, that a judge would make a judgment such that she was released on
license.
On there's a certain term.
Yeah, where they can have licenses.
That's it.
You can have a license.
It's released on license and without a stipulation. Because
one is assuming
the norm is a tag.
One is assuming the tag was given in terms of to monitor so that she doesn't do anything or go back to doing protests or doing any sort of actions like stepping out on a motorway. One is assuming that is potentially why the tag was issued. And she was given. She was let out of jail early. So
therefore, put an alternative. Therefore, she has to report to a certain police station 4 times a day.
Okay, Addy. And in terms of what they do in terms of Just Stop Oil and the actions they carry out, are you in favour of the way in which they go about their campaigning?
Of course not. Because effectively, because my reaction is to the person and the circumstance of that person, the age, etc., etc. My reflection isn't on what their cause was. Sure. Because everybody has different causes, and they go about expressing that view in various ways. Some are lawful, some are unlawful. I believe that's unlawful. It's been stated as unlawful. I agree it's unlawful. But the way that it's actually handled should be individual. So if you've got a young person, etc., etc., who's aware of all, fully aware of everything that can happen, and they're young enough and stable enough to withstand extra time in jail, well, fine. But there's an old lady, you say, promissory oath that the judges have sworn to have to be fair. Natural justice would say, well, because the equipment won't fit, that should not be the reason to put her back in jail. It should be the point at which the authorities
one would say
actually say, well, what alternatives can we find?
And maybe say,
having a license with
maybe some would say
that she reports to.
Maybe some would say, Addy, a bit of common sense here.
Every
Addy.
say 4-6 hours or whatever.
Well, thank you. Thanks for calling in. That's Addy there in Northumberland. Let's talk to Simon in Torquay. So what do you make of it, Simon?
Well, basically, I'm a little cynical about this. It's like Newton's laws of physics. To every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, basically, if you can't do the time, then you don't do the crime, do you?
That's your view. I mean, so she did her sentence. Well, she was released early. It's the actual monitoring bracelet that doesn't fit because of her deep vein thrombosis. So, computer says no. She has to go back to prison, and she's already been recalled. She's in jail right now.
Well, that's just my simple thought.
We're talking about a 77-year-old grandmother protester who's been recalled to prison because an electronic tag meant to monitor her movements couldn't be fitted to her ankle or her wrists because of her deep vein thrombosis. Gay Delap has been carted back to jail, having previously taken part in a protest against oil by blocking the M25 way back in 2022. Her supporters say it is cruel. The government says it's just policy. So I'm asking, what do you think? Is Christmas after all? Could an alternative not have been found? Or is it right the campaigner serves her 20-month jail sentence strictly according to the rules? Give us a call, 08085 909 693. Maybe you were one of the people that were disrupted by the protests, or maybe you're on the side of the protesters and you think their actions are correct despite the fact that they're illegal. Give us a call. It's more on the story about the 77-year-old Just Stop Oil activist Gay Delap. She's been released from prison, having serving a 20-month sentence for protesting on the M25. She was put on home detention curfew, which required her to wear a tag. But the authorities found they didn't have the right size wrist tag to fit her thin wrists. So she's been sent back to prison, having hoped she'd have been home for Christmas. Well, Fiona Atkinson is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, and I spoke to her just before we came on air.
It's absolutely outrageous. She's a 77-year-old grandmother who happens to have thin wrists. And the reason she's been recalled is she was allowed out of prison early. She was given a sentence of 20 months. She was allowed out early. But that was because she was going to go on a tag. Now, absolutely not her fault. The company who provide the tags haven't been able to come up with one small enough for her. She can't have one on her ankle for health reasons. She's got quite serious health problems at the moment, and she's got very thin wrists. And for some reason, we have a system in this country that seems to just favour men. They're not used to providing tags for women with thin wrists, apparently.
And how is she feeling about this and her family? Have you been in touch with them?
Can you imagine how they're feeling? It seems to me especially cruel to let someone out and say, this is fine, you've done your sentence, okay, you can go, and then recall them because of your problem, your ineptitude. So it's not her fault she's being called back in. And it seems like an extra punishment. So, of course, her family are absolutely outraged and upset and worried about her.
Well, I mean, the Ministry of Justice, the MOJ, has said that if offenders could not be monitored in the community electronically, they would be returned to prison, even if it was no fault of their own. So do you think it's the system they could have looked at this and thought, is she a risk?
Absolutely. They could absolutely have done that. All Just Stop Oil supporters are peaceful people, and they're all acting for extremely good reasons, and they're acting out of a sense of responsibility. I think the whole thing stinks of failure. It absolutely stinks of failure. There's firstly the biggest failure of all, which is the failure to protect us from climate breakdown, which is why Gay did it in the first place. She's a responsible grandmother who cares about her grandchildren. Right. Then there's the failure to set up a system that actually works for, that really weird thing, a thin woman. There's quite a lot of women around who are thin and deserve their chance of being released early as much as any man.
Fiona,
but they just add the final failure is to respond with common sense when the system doesn't work, and it's your fault, sorry, but it is ineptitude.
And Fiona,
and the result of this failure is a 77-year-old grandma in prison for Christmas.
Fiona, some will be listening and some will have been involved in those disruptions on the M25, and Gay was jailed for 20 months for participating in that Just Stop Oil protest that blocked the M25 back in November 2022. I remember reporting on it as well. Mm-hmm. People were angry, the disruption. So some might be listening and saying she deserves what she gets. What would you think to those views of people that don't quite get it and are quite upset and angry that they couldn't get to work or miss flights or whatever that day that your campaign group took to the roads?
Absolutely understandable. And yet, isn't it equally understandable that when you've engaged with what is actually happening to us all, i.e. climate breakdown, we're seeing it now, aren't we? The floods in Valencia, how disruptive were those? If you lived in Tenbury Wells and you were there a couple of weeks ago, you'd be mopping up the 7th flood in 4 years. How disruptive is all of that? So at some point, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, Just Stop Oil are doing this because what do you think we're doing it for? I'm a grandma too. And I've watched what happened in Valencia. I watched what happened in Tunbridge Wells, and it's coming closer, and it's going to happen to us all. There's a Valencia waiting to get us all, and we have to get our heads around it, and we have to push our government to take action, because at the moment our government is just
and Fiona, just lastly then, do you think that that Gay will be released before Christmas Day? Do you think that there'll be a U-turn, or do you think this is it, she's going back for Christmas and the government might have a rethink, the MOJ?
What I think they should do is to rethink the word justice. How can anybody say they're from a system that practices justice when they're putting a peaceful, elderly, ill woman in prison over Christmas because of their own ineptitude? How can that ever be described as justice? And this is a woman who was taking responsibility, who was taking an action in order to move a government to doing what they should be doing, which is protecting their citizens. This is about the failure to protect citizens. The least they could do now is to protect this particular citizen from their own ineptitude, i.e. not being able to come up with an electronic tag for someone who just happens to have thin wrists. It's outrageous.
Fiona Atkinson there from Just Stop Oils. You can hear how much her supporters say it's cruel. The government says it's just policy. So I'm asking, what do you think? It's Christmas time after all. Could an alternative not have been found? Or is it right that the campaigner serves her 20-month jail sentence strictly according to the rules? We've just had a text in. This is from Justin in Northern Ireland. He's text to say, don't break the law if you don't want to face the consequences. I have zero sympathy for her, I'm afraid. I fully support making an example out of her to suppress others thinking about doing similar. At the end of the day, each and every oil protester is a hypocrite, as they all make use of products that are either oil-based or are manufactured using oil power. I mean, what do you make of that? 08085 909 693. The lines are open, so let's talk to Ben in Clacton. Morning, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
I mean, what do you make of that the Just Oil campaigner there just defending Gay and saying that actually it's diabolical, it's outrageous, she says?
Well, whilst I don't agree with the methods used, stopping motorways and stopping possibly ambulances getting to hospital, they've done less of that recently because of the public outcry about it. But this is totally cruel. I mean, in the day and age we have now of technology, I'm sure there's some other way. I mean, in fact, if I keep my mobile phone on, they can trace where I am. That's just a mobile phone, and that's minor technology compared to what they've got available nowadays. And they could have done something else, but they seem to just act cruelly. And this lady should publicise it everywhere possible and put pressure on MPs. What is a local MP doing about this anyway?
Well, the local MP
I haven't heard anything from them. Well, I haven't heard anything from the government themselves.
No.
I mean, they're in so much trouble with this government with some of the decisions they made. Why they done this sort of thing? Just in a civilized country and a caring country, it's cruel, and it should not. I mean, you got the actual COP28, which was recent. I mean, the Greta Thunberg. If you watch the video of Greta Thunberg after that and her verdict on it, nothing was done for the countries that will disappear under the water. And if you think the refugee problem is bad at the moment, wait until that happens. And even in our country, we've got. I read a report last year about coastal areas of Essex being underwater, quite large coastal areas of Essex being underwater over the next 10 years, and parts of the Thames will overflow in London. Because the barrier is now getting to its end. Yeah. So therefore that will happen as well, and the scientists are saying that. Yeah. So it's happening. We see our own eyes tell us the weather is happening now is not usual. It's climate change.
Well, going back to Gay Delap and her case, it has been raised by the Bristol Central MP, Carla Denyer, who has wrote to the Prisons Minister, Lord Timpson, and the Probation Service. So you never know. It might be a U-turn in terms of her being released before Christmas Day. Let's talk to John in Newcastle. Morning, John. How are you doing this morning?
I'm all right, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right. So Just Stop Oil then. So what do you make of this a protester going back to prison because the
I think it's wrong. I mean, there's people coming out of prison doing worse crimes than what... Now, I got early release in April this year. And I was on tag when I first came to prison, right?
Yeah.
But they phone you 3 times a day to make sure you are where you are.
Do they?
And probation service check on you, right? Now, my tag, because of what I'm staying, didn't have a signal, right?
Right.
But my tag wouldn't work.
Oh.
So in the end, probation service took it off. So I only wore it for about 2 months.
Right.
Now, my sentence didn't finish until next June. But the probation service won't report to them once a week, which I'm still doing. But because I've no signal where I'm in, I've got no signal on the phone, I've no signal on the computer, I had no signal tag. I could wear the tag, but it wouldn't work.
So they
I was accused of being everywhere and everywhere, even though I've been out of the house.
So it's
The tag didn't work.
and the tag. What I mean, is it awkward to have on your ankle? Does it itch? I mean, what's it do?
It does it, but you get used to it. You know, and I mean, they've got a box attached to it so that they can ring you and check where you are.
Right.
And they'd ring me twice a day. And they say, "Oh, you've been here." No, I haven't even been out of the house today.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So they didn't take you back. Maybe they deemed you not a risk then, I guess. Different rules in different cities.
The crime I committed was a lot far worse than this old lady's done, right? The probation are supposed to be in charge of the tags, probation service. So she should be reported to them. I do. I still do it. I did it then. I report to them once a week.
Right.
Nothing to do with the police.
So you have strict conditions over the tag. So your tag didn't work, and they said, fine, okay, you'll just have to report to probation. Maybe her rules were different then in terms of her.
I was reporting to probation anyway. Right? But the tag wouldn't work because we had no signal in the house. They tried tags.
Well, I guess this is a new one for the Ministry of Justice because her wrists were simply too thin. She's a small old frau lady, and they maybe just weren't. I mean, you don't really get many 77-year-olds on tag. She's probably one of the first.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be some other way of fitting it. It doesn't have to be on the wrist. Mine was on my ankle. She can't wear it on her ankle because of the medical issues.
She's got deep vein thrombosis, so they couldn't put it on her ankles, but they were trying to put it on her wrist, but the tag was too big, so it kept slipping off her wrists.
But they can alter the size of the tags.
I thought to myself, why didn't they just make it like a neck bracelet and attach it to a bracelet or something? But I guess
they can do that. They can do that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
It's up to the tagging company. You know, I mean, the first time they came out, they said, all right, we need to change it. Second time they came out, I'll change it. The third time, the probation service had turned around and said, well, if he's got no signal where he is, what's the point in him wearing it?
Right.
Get off.
Oh, dear. Well, John, thank you. I mean? That's John in Newcastle. So yeah, go on.
I'm on mine for 4 months now.
Yeah? Well, John, thanks for sharing that with us. That's John in Newcastle. He's calling about the Just Stop Oil protester that's been sent back to prison because the electronic tag that was meant to monitor her simply didn't fit. She couldn't have it on her ankle because she has deep vein thrombosis. So they tried to put it on her wrist, or wrists, and her wrists are too small. So computer says no, she has to go back to jail. She's in jail right now, having been sentenced to 20 months in prison for taking part in that M25 protest back in 2022. So we've got Liv in Wimbledon on the line. Morning, Liv. How are you doing?
Hi, Greg. I'm fine, Greg, yeah.
What do you make of it?
I mean, I do appreciate the fact that she is 77. She's an older person. You know, I was a carer for my mum, and she recently passed away. But and I do, you know, I do understand that. But there is another aspect to this, which a wider maybe aspect, which I see on this story, is that at the time of those protests, I can remember there were quite a few news reports saying about how ambulances were trying to get through and they couldn't because the protesters were stopping the ambulances. And I just sort of think, you know, I know they're saying that it's wicked what's happened to this lady, but it was wicked that these ambulances couldn't get through. And some of these people, obviously, if you're in an ambulance, you're seriously ill. You know, you're not going there just on a visit. But they were stopped for quite a few hours. So how many of those people condition worsened because they couldn't get to hospital quick enough?
And then you also had the police that had to risk their lives going onto the live motorway. So there was a lot of people involved. It was a daring attempt to disrupt, and they did succeed. And they didn't seem to have any. They've got sympathy, you know, for this elderly person who was also doing the protesting, but they hadn't got any sympathy for the people who might have been seriously ill on the road. I do find it a bit of a contradiction and a bit of an irony, really. And they've stopped. Well, they're not doing them actions as much now. It's kind of they've changed tact a bit. I think they realised that it was so unpopular. Because I've actually been out working as a journalist, covering a lot of these actions, and I'd be on the ground reporting, and people would get out of their cars and they were furious. And you could see the anger in some people. Some people were sympathetic and said, look. And I remember specifically at a Just Stop Oil protest, and I was interviewing one of the protesters who'd glued his hands to the ground of the floor. And I said, you know, why are you doing this? And he said, I'm trying to save your life. And he said, in 10 years, you will look back and you will thank us for doing this. So I was like, well, I'm not sure you can tell the nurse that's trying to get to A&E, having been called in because of lack of staff. But they were like, what's an hour's disruption when in, 10 years you're going to look back and thank us? I mean, what do you make of that?
And I think that's the thing, though. But an hour can be life-threatening to someone who's trying to get into hospital. Minutes. It can be minutes, and someone's had a heart attack. You don't just sort of say, "Oh, well, we'll wait an hour before we can help them." I just sort of think, and I can remember those reports. So I can remember similar comments that you just reported on at that time.
I was in the
can
newspapers.
Remember it on the radio.
I remember the Daily Express took loads of pictures and said BBC journalist gives airtime to Just Stop Oil campaigners. I was doing live breakfast TV reports on the hour, and we'd got a scoop that they were going at a certain location. So we got down there, and lo and behold, as soon as we turned up, it was chaos. I mean, the roads got stopped, people were bibbing, people were coming out, and the police weren't there. The police didn't get there for 10 minutes. And in that time, there was a couple of guys, big burly guys, got out of their cars and they went right up to the protesters. And I think had that siren not been heard in the background, there would have been a beatdown. There would have been a riot or a fight because the car drivers were so angry, but the protesters were so calm, and you could see they were scared. And I think, in hindsight, they were probably hoping the police did get there to de-escalate it. But I think us being there filming it actually prevented them getting attacked and assaulted.
Yes, I'm sure. Witnessing that and being there, I can imagine that. It's frightening, actually, and scary, these situations. And I don't think people. I mean, you might have passion for a cause, but there's got to be safe protest. It can't be that things escalate into a situation where people are put in danger. Whether it's drivers on the road, obviously getting really angry because they're trying to get from A to B, but people trying to get to hospital, it just can't. You can't sort of say that that's a good reason to do these things. They've got, if they want to find alternative ways, then they should, because it's not fair. And then you're sort of, you end up with these situations now further down the road where, this lady is now, she had to go to prison or whatever, and she's finding herself she's got problems. So. Yeah. It's not always as simple as you think,
No. So we've got a few texts here. This is on the protester joust. We've got Charlie from Cornwall that says, regarding the lady that's currently in prison, my opinion, there are always the means and ways of making a point, but these Just Stop Oil people, whilst having a point, they have created havoc to the public. So what do you make of that text? Do you agree the tactics that Just Stop Oil do and have done? I mean, they don't do it as much now in terms of stopping traffic or M25. Well, it was illegal. It's been made illegal anyway. It was illegal before then. Another text just in, but with no name, says, what I find offensive about the Just Stop Oil protester in her 70s returning to prison is the enormous expense to the public instead of the fraction of the cost producing a tag of a suitable size. That's an interesting text, actually, because the recall to prison, some are saying, well, the Just Stop Oil campaigners are saying that it's a wasted resource and will cost the taxpayer £12,000 to keep Gay Delap in prison to continue her 20-month sentence. The recall to prison is a ridiculous waste of money, they say, waste of resources and money, and will cost the taxpayer £12,000 to keep Gay Delap in prison. What do you make of that? 08085 909 693. You can also text me 85058. We've also got another text. They're all coming in this morning, so we got no text name on this one. Accidents were caused by these idiots, the text reads, who climbed gantries on the M25, caused a bad accident. There are better ways to register protest. They broke an injunction, so should suffer the consequences of jail terms as they were warned in advance. We've got Steve in Colchester talking about the protesters. Morning, Steve. So, I mean, what do you make of this, that this 77-year-old grandmother has been recalled to prison because they didn't have a tag that fitted her?
Well, they could have. Come on, there's another way of working that out, I'm quite sure. In the world of technology, yeah, come on, really?
Do you think she's being used as an example?
Yes.
Or maybe, we don't know. I don't know the background. It was maybe she was being difficult. Who knows?
Well, who knows? But when I originally rung up, I said that the ambulance thing was government propaganda used against them.
To say that the ambulances, because I thought about this because in the M25 one, I don't know how many ambulances were trying to get down the M25 motorway.
How many ambulances has anybody ever seen on blue lights on a motorway? Rarely.
It's quite rare.
Because ambulances travel from houses to housing estates. Do you get what I mean? To hospitals, through towns. If you was to say how many ambulances has anybody ever seen on blue lights on a motorway, it would be never, almost.
Well, Steve, in a way, they did break a court injunction that prevented them from going on the motorway. And I think that was it was almost like a backlash against the law to go ahead with the protest anyway.
I can see that point. But look, when people protest against the government, there's always, conjecture about it, or should you be doing it? But which was the bigger picture, to stop oil? We are realising that, temperatures are rising, bits and pieces. Nobody seems to be doing anything about it. So you will have extremists, possibly, there's many extremists. The fact that these extremists were a bunch of, I don't know, old ladies or whatever, with trying trying to do their best to get themselves, because they weren't being listened. If they do it on a smaller level, they needed to do something that would hit in a big way. And that certainly done the trick, didn't it?
And you think to yourself, Steve, that like she's 77 and she's campaigning on the M25. She would have been what? 2 years before that, so 75. So you got to ask yourself, that takes some guts to do that. She must have a real calling to want to protest.
Yes,
and some say to benefit us, they say.
Yes,
in the long term.
By the time the real problem of global warming kicks in, this lady won't be alive. So who was she doing it for?
Well, her grandchildren, one is assuming. Future generations.
It was for herself. You know, it was for the youth of tomorrow. But what really grates with me, and this is what annoyed me a little bit, where this lady who rang up earlier and said the ambulances were stopped. Well, an investigative journalist worked on it.
Right.
If you do your due diligence, Well, in that area where it was, even spoke to ambulance and hospital staff. They said, well, we didn't have ambulances on there. Did you see what I mean?
I think there might have been some confusion, because there were plenty of... Would that have been good old Boris's... Was it Boris? Back then, time? Where were we? 2 years ago, so 2022. Yeah, it would have been. No, I'm trying to know. It's Rishi. Was it Rishi Sunak? I can't...
Well, whoever. It was their propaganda machine to get the public on side and against.
I reported it on the ground, Steve. I didn't cover the M25 gathering or protest, but I did cover the ones in and around London, and the roads were blocked, and there is no denying that. And I did hear blue lights.
I can see how infuriating it would be for a lot of people.
But I will say this: they did let ambulances through when I was at a protest. I remember being there, and they would let certain people through, and they would create a pathway for emergency vehicles. So, but not all cases, not all of those protests, that was possible.
No, well, apparently the old protesters always maintained that the hard shoulder was always, they were willing to open it up for emergency vehicles. But of course, when they went to try and say that to the public, I do believe the government put a is it a DNA on it? Not DNA. You know where they do not resuscitate somebody saying it. Yeah.
No.
If they turned around and said that they would let the ambulances through, that would get them extra time in prison. Do you see where I'm going?
Okay.
They were sort of they were threatened with extra prison time if they spoke out a line against the government.
And she's gone back.
Way of trying to put it.
And she's gone back. I mean, do you think that
it's crazy,
she's being used as an example?
Yep, most certainly. Yeah,
because we just had a caller before. We had a caller before in Newcastle that had a tag, and he simply told the probation service that there's no signal in his house, and they said, okay, don't wear the tag. So one is maybe different companies have different rules.
There's a number of areas, because I do believe they now work off of internet, satellite, and whatever. There's certain areas of the country that still struggle to get internet reception. Now, if you're in one of them areas, they're going to struggle to get a tag on somebody, aren't they? Logically. But,
yes, it's an interesting one, isn't it? So are you hoping she's home for Christmas?
Oh, most certainly. I think somebody's going to do a Who's U-turn and wind up eating humble pie.
Well, you heard it here first on 5 Live.
You hope so. At least we hope so. If they don't, you just say, hang your head in shame.
Well, Steve, it's a pleasure chatting to you this morning. You have yourself a great Christmas. You got any plans Christmas Day?
I'm getting on. I've got no family. I'm sort of 64.
Yeah.
Slightly disabled.
Well, there's lots on telly.
Living in a cold house because I can't afford the heat. But hey-ho, we'll get on with it.
Oh, Steve.
You know?
You have to get yourself a couple of extra blankets. I know
I'm
that's
an optimistic. Oh, I'm under a quilt now with a hot water bottle. That's how we live now.
Oh, Steve.
You know? But,
all right. Well, look, at least I'm keeping you company this morning, and you've called in. So, look, chin up and have yourself a Merry Christmas. That's Steve in Colchester talking about the protesters. Let's talk to Colin now, who's in Stockport. So, Colin, morning. So, you were talking about tattoos. So, did you hear that interview I did earlier with Matt? And he's an author, and he's written a book about the history of tattoo and the art form. So, are you a fan of tattoos?
No.
You don't like them?
No.
Why?
Good morning, Greg, anyway.
Morning.
No. The only tattoo I would ever consider having would be an Ironman tattoo if you manage to do an Ironman triathlon, which I haven't come nowhere near. I've done a couple of Olympic distance triathlons, which is bad enough.
An Ironman triathlon? You've got to explain that. I'm not familiar.
Okay. So in a traditional triathlon, Olympic distance, it's a swim, bike, run.
Right.
The Ironman, which takes about 11 hours if you're any good, which I'm not. Well, even now. Even when I was younger, wasn't.
We can all dream.
Well, yeah, definitely. If you manage to complete one, you can have an Ironman. I'm sure you can Google it, the image, which is like an M with an I dot over the top. And that's the only tattoo I would ever consider having.
And where are you having it?
Well, that's a very good question. It's supposed to be most painful if you have it close to your bone. So like your ankle or, your shoulder or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll wimp out of that one, thanks very much. The least painful possible.
Yes.
But unfortunately, both my wife and one of my daughters have had tattoos, which might have provoked a bit of a conversation in the house. So, no, I'm not a fan. And
did she tell you, Colin, your daughter, did she tell you she's having it done? Or did she just say, here you go, Dad, I've had this done?
Yeah, Dad, I've had this done. So did Jane, my wife. So, Cat and Jane. I'm like, what? And Cat, actually, Cat and Jane are both involved in this one. I came back home one day, and I was doing whatever I was doing, and Jane's her hair had turned purple. So I can't use the language I exactly used at the time. But I remember saying to Cat, what has happened to Mum's hair?
Oh dear.
It's turned purple.
And the tattoo, was it big, or was you know, it's...
No, it was a little bird type small thing on her shoulder, so
that's all right,
not that obvious. And, if you're wearing your normal clothing, you wouldn't see it, so...
Yeah. I've never done it, Colin. One day I think I'll do it. One day, I'm not sure. I like the idea of initials or some sort of old English writing or some. I don't know. It has to be unusual. But then, what's unusual today?
I get why military people have it done. If you served in the military and your regiment or whatever has, an SAS tattoo or whatever, totally fine. I know a couple of guys who have been in the SAS and they've got them on their wrists.
Well, Colin, about 10 years ago, I wanted to get a Celtic band on my arm. And now I'm glad I didn't, because they're not as fashionable as they were 10 years ago.
What is a Celtic
It's
art?
like a Celtic band. It's a band, it almost looks tribal on your...
like a wristband or tattooed on your wrist?
Tattooed on my shoulder,
really?
on my arm.
Okay.
But I never did it. I never got it done. But I was going to almost, and then I didn't. But now I'm thinking, had I 10 years forward, they're not trendy anymore, not in fashion. So I would have had this thing stuck on my arm, and then I'd have probably had to get laser surgery, and it's so expensive.
Yeah,
but
apparently tattoos are incredibly painful
something
to
small,
remove.
I think. Something small. Well, Colin, it's a pleasure chatting to you. You have an amazing Christmas. You got much planned Christmas Day?
Yeah. Christmas Eve I have.
Yeah.
Where I live in Stockport, I normally go to church, and they just, there's no public transport. I can't get to church where the service is. So Christmas Eve is my Christmas Day in a lot of ways. So Kim's coming round.
Nice.
She's lovely. I'm going to invite Marie, which I haven't done yet, but she's also lovely.
Yeah.
So I'll cook some food and do whatever. And there might be some dogs around and general chaos. Depends on the weather, really, a lot of it. So
yeah, of course it is. The weather, and let's hope. Well, they say it's going to be mild this Christmas.
Is it?
Unbelievably.
I'm not that far ahead,
Apparently, I was hearing this last week.
Only a couple of days, isn't it?
There's going to be no snow. That's what I'm sure I heard Thomas Schaffernacker say that on BBC News earlier on in the week.
Oh, well.
But
Thomas
don't
says
quote
so,
me.
then that's it. That's gospel, isn't it?
Well, don't quote me. There will be snow somewhere. Well, definitely maybe not here in this country. But Colin, thanks so much. You have a great Christmas.
You have a good Christmas too, Greg.
All right, cheers. That's Colin from Stockport there. So let's now talk to Dave from Nottinghamshire and Cora from Buckinghamshire. So we're going to have you on both together. And we're talking about this protester, the 77-year-old grandmother that's been returned to jail after problems with an electronic tag to monitor her. Ultimately, it didn't fit, so she's been sent back to prison, and she was meant to be out in time for Christmas. So we go to you first, Dave. I mean, what do you think of all of this and the Just Stop Oil campaign and what's happened to Gay DLAP?
That's what Northamptonshire, not Nottinghamshire.
Oh, sorry. Do you know it does say that? Do you know?
As a Leicester fan, not Nottinghamshire.
Dave, I ain't got my glasses on. I bought the wrong glasses today, so I got bifocals, and today they're not.
But I suppose as what's going on with this 17-year-old lady's age, my mother-in-law is 77, and she's got strong beliefs. She's Maltese, so she's very passionate about what she believes in, and I believe if this was her sort of thing, she'd be out there doing the protests as well. But
do you think?
Send her back to prison because their equipment has failed. It's not her fault. Surely there's some common sense going on here somewhere. Like, we messed up. We'll just fit a new tag. Surely it's not her fault the tag didn't fit properly and fell off, whatever. And
and what do you think about
what you call them? Probation service should be there and sorting it out for her, not sending her to prison. You know what I mean?
And what do you make of in terms of the reason she's in jail for that protest back in November 2022?
As far as I'm aware, one of the rights in our constitution, whatever it is in this country, it's not just America, isn't it? But it's a right to protest. I mean, we're allowed to protest anything. I mean, as long as it does. They cause a bit of disruption, but if it's fairly true that ambulances through, police cars through, fire engines through, then what's the problem?
Well, it was the fact they breached a court order to prevent them from protesting. So that was kind of different.
Yeah, but that court order, in my opinion, was wrong. Why should there be a court order preventing legal protest, which is ingrained in our human rights and whatever of this country?
Well, I guess there is, but I guess it's not to jump on a busy motorway and cause tailbacks.
Yeah, but the right to protest is something that people fought for years. I mean, it's almost going back to suffragettes. They're slightly different, but they say themselves in front of the king's horse and everything. Some got killed and that sort of thing. And it's been around for years in this country. It's what made this country great. We allowed protest. We don't shoot them like they do in, I don't know, Middle East countries, whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, in different countries they do indeed. Now, let's bring in Cora. So stay on the line, Dave. But Cora, Merry Christmas. Hello, morning.
Merry Christmas, Greg.
How you doing? I got your location right, Buckinghamshire. I mean, what do you make of this 77-year-old grandmother going back to jail?
Well, as an elderly grandmother myself, I do probably have more sympathy with her than perhaps I would have had otherwise. The cause is very worthy, but obviously there's different ways of protest. But I just think that at 77, it's a very cruel thing to happen to a grandmother, because looking at the future, how many Christmases will she have? That's a bit morbid, I know, but realistically, every Christmas is a bonus with your family, your grandchildren, and that obviously was what she was protesting for. her grandchildren, her probably great-grandchildren in some cases. So I do feel that is very harsh. And as I said to your young lady, what did they do before all these electronic tags? Why is it we have to rely on technology when it used to be people-powered? People in the offices tracking her phone or her reporting to the police station.
I think it would have been a longer sentence, Cora, because I think before tag, it was you were still in jail waiting to get released. I think the tag was introduced.
Well, people come out on probation, they appeal, don't they? I mean, I don't think probably they would have any appeal apart from freedom of speech, the right to protest. But no, that was the point. And I just said to the young lady on the phone, what a difference between that and HS2, which everyone in their right minds realised wasn't practical in a small country as ours is, and built up in small villages and hamlets. And we've been so disrupted here with Waddesdon, right on the outskirts of our village, with HS2. And for 4 weekends, the village was cut off that end. It was closed. The road was closed, and we had to do a long detour in the opposite direction from where we wanted to go to Aylesbury, around villages, hamlets. The roads there were congested with traffic both ways. Now, ambulances, fire engines, any buses, we had to go about 15 miles round the other end and come into Aylesbury on the other.
Sounds like a nightmare, Cora. And I mean,
it was awful. It was awful because, you know, you've got family, friends that were coming, and they had to do the same
15
detours.
miles, that's so long. And I mean, in terms of Just Stop Oil, then, those protests, those early ones back in 2022, was you affected? Was you delayed? Could you get about? Did they affect you, those particular protests?
No. I mean, I obviously watched it on the news and thought, you know, quite a very extreme method of protest, but then we're in extreme times, aren't we?
Yeah. And Dave, I know you're still there. Do you think she should be released, or do you think the government will have a U-turn? The MOJ will have common sense and say, do you know what, we're going to release her?
Why not just go back to what they did before tagging and like make her sign off police bail every week at a police station? Something like that. That's what they used to do before tags were around, so why not do that if the tag keeps falling off?
Yeah. And Cora, what do you think? Do you think they need to just have a U-turn, have a bit more sympathy? It's Christmas after all.
Well, apparently we're told we're not a Christian country anymore, so I can't say it would be the Christian thing to do. But I think it would be. And they've let out all these prisoners. Are they all tagged? So many they've let out to put more in. So I just wonder, you know, and that gentleman that said his tag didn't work, so he's got the freedom without any comeback until next June. So,
and he did say that his crime was more serious than what Gay Delap had done, or what she was jailed for, but we didn't ask him what. But I mean, it's interesting. But I guess wow, it's interesting times. I mean, as I've said before, I've been on the road reporting on the protests, and people do get angry with them. People do get frustrated. Just Stop Oil haven't been doing their actions much, those antics of stopping traffic. They've kind of stopped now, and now they're using other tactics. But do you think ultimately their message is getting out there in terms of, are you worried, Dave, about the environment? Do you believe in what they're protesting about?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, nothing we do now will affect us. I mean, my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, what will they be left with if we keep going the way we're going?
And you strongly believe that?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And I mean,
a little bit of disruption, maybe a few delayed journeys into London, whatever. There's nothing, is it, compared to a future where there is no I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
All our grandchildren inherit.
And what about you, Cora, in terms of the cause of what Gay Dilap was fighting for or trying to highlight? Do you believe in that in terms of global warming, climate change?
Well, definitely. I mean, we can see it all around us, can't we? The fields between here and Aylesbury, they flood, and they flooded since I was a girl. But they've built houses there now. So all these thousands of houses they're going to build, demolishing trees and hedgerows that absorb water. Their roots go down and they absorb a lot of trees, absorb a tremendous amount of water. But when they're chopped down, then there's going to be flooding. And concreting over the green belt is going to create more flooding. So we're only a small country. Build up. If you have to build at all, build up. But certainly not these big detached houses that they are building on the outskirts of these new estates, taking up just as much land as a row of small terraced 2 bedrooms for young couples starting off would suffice.
Hey, so lots of you calling in about the protester, the 77-year-old grandmother who's been recalled to prison because an electronic tag meant to monitor her movements couldn't be fitted to her ankle or wrists. Now, she couldn't have it fitted to her ankle because she's got deep vein thrombosis. So they thought, well, we'll put it on your wrist, but the tag was too big and kept slipping off her wrist. So instead of saying, look, we'll come back tomorrow, they said, no, you're going back to prison today. So she's in jail as I'm speaking right now. She'd already served some of her sentence, but was released early in time for Christmas, only to be told you're going back to jail because the Ministry of Justice tag didn't fit her. What do you make of that? Let's talk to TJ in Newcastle. Morning, TJ. How are you doing?
Morning. Quite good. Nice to listen to your programme, by the way.
Thank you. And I mean, Merry Christmas. But I mean, so we're talking about a lot this morning. So, I mean, 77-year-old Gran put back in prison because the tag didn't fit her, the electronic tag that was meant to monitor her. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of strange things around this issue. I think they should have found a tag, if that's what they were going to do, that would fit her and it would be comfortable and not cause health problems. But she's pretty lively for 77. I mean, I'm not sure she's the same woman that climbed up a ladder at a gantry on the M25. And
I think that's her.
I wasn't so keen. I wasn't so keen on sort of the direct action of Just Talk because I think, sure, protest, and there's a lot of awareness about climate change, I think, not just with young people, but I think it's the wrong way to go about it. It was too disruptive in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I would have said try and find a different way to bring it to people's attention, you know, there's different ways of lobbying.
Yeah, and do you think the MOJ might have a U-turn, a little reconsider on this? I mean, lots of people getting involved. The prisons minister's been contacted by the local MP in Bristol, and we're talking about it this morning. So, I mean, she's in jail now. She got recalled yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, there's different sides because there was an injunction and it was publicised, as you'd mentioned earlier. So it was a bit crazy to get involved and to go off and do the protest. But I would have thought a different sort of sentencing would have been more appropriate. Like, say something like community service, which she could do in her time.
Of course.
You know, to offset having broken the law technically. And it does seem a bit ridiculous to punish somebody in this way. It sounds very harsh, as a lot of your listeners have said.
Yeah, TJ. It's one of those stories. I'm sure we're going to hear more. But thanks for calling. It's got Naomi in London on the line. So I want to quickly get to Naomi before we go to the news. But thanks so much, TJ, for calling in. You plans for Christmas Day? You got nice plans? Oh,
yes, good morning.
Oh, hello, Naomi. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. Yes, I'm calling about the protester.
Yeah, what do you make of it?
Well, I think a lot of people are saying that on that day they caused a lot of, disruption and chaos. And but the thing is that she didn't act alone. I mean, she was part of a very large group, some of whom might not have been jailed at all. And she's been considered safe for release. So therefore, I think that she should be released.
Yeah, I mean, she was released. She really was. She was released on the 18th of November and then put on a home detention curfew. But a tag couldn't be fitted to her leg because of deep vein thrombosis. And then it was too large for her wrist. So they said, you got to go back to jail.
For how long was she out before she got recalled?
So out on the 18th of November, so almost a month ago, a month and a few days. So she was out, living her best life. And then the tag, for whatever reason, she had to have a tag to monitor her movements. It just didn't fit. So they were like, well, we've got to recall you back to jail and now you'll finish the rest of the 20-month sentence.
Well, apparently they're short of prison spaces, and she didn't commit any crime while she was out.
Yeah.
And she's probably unlikely to alone, and she couldn't have caused that amount of disruption and chaos alone anyway,
Well, do you know what, Naomi? The interesting thing is the Ministry of Justice have put in a statement. They said if offenders could not be monitored in the community electronically, they would be returned to prison, even if it was no fault of their own. So that's like if the battery dies in a tag, or it can't charge itself, or you're going back to prison.
Right, but then that is not her fault if she was considered safe for release, and it's costing a lot of money to keep her there. I'm not ringing actually because she's a grandmother or elderly. I would say the same no matter what her age was, that she'd completed her sentence. But it's down to the manufacturers of the tags to make something, that will fit people that are thin and all sizes,
Well, some people are saying it's cruel, it's un-Christmas-like, and lots of people are calling in about this one this morning. And some that say, actually, she shouldn't have been on the M25 motorway in the first place. And this comes, you can't do, I think someone said, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. So that's that viewpoint there, one caller said earlier. Now, more on that story about the 77-year-old Just Stop Oil activist, Gay Delap. She's been released from prison, serving a 20-month sentence for protesting on the M25. So she'd been released. She was then put on home detention curfew, which required her to wear a tag. But the authorities found they didn't have the right size of wrist tag to fit her thin wrists. So she's been sent back to prison, having hoped she'd be out for Christmas. Well, Fiona Atkinson is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil.
It's absolutely outrageous. She's a 77-year-old grandmother who happens to have thin wrists. And the reason she's been recalled is she was allowed out of prison early. She was given a sentence of 20 months. She was allowed out early. But that was because she was going to go on a tag. Now, absolutely not her fault. The company who provide the tags haven't been able to come up with one small enough for her. She can't have one on her ankle for health reasons. She's got quite serious health problems at the moment, and she's got very thin wrists. And for some reason, we have a system in this country that seems to just favour men. They're not used to providing tags for women with thin wrists, apparently.
And how is she feeling about this and her family? Have you been in touch with them?
Can you imagine how they're feeling? It seems to me especially cruel to let someone out and say, this is fine, you've done your sentence, okay, you can go, and then recall them because of your problem, your ineptitude. So it's not her fault she's being called back in. And it seems like an extra punishment. So, of course, her family are absolutely outraged and upset. upset and worried about her.
Well, I mean, the Ministry of Justice, the MOJ, has said that if offenders could not be monitored in the community electronically, they would be returned to prison, even if it was no fault of their own. So do you think it's the system they made it could have looked at this and thought, is she a risk?
Absolutely. They could absolutely have done that. All Just Stop Oil supporters are peaceful people, and they're all acting for extremely good reasons, and they're acting out of a sense of responsibility. I think the whole thing stinks of failure. It absolutely stinks of failure. There's firstly the biggest failure of all, which is the failure to protect us from climate breakdown, which is why Gay did it in the first place. She's a responsible grandmother who cares about her grandchildren. Right. Then there's the failure to set up a system that actually works for, that really weird thing, a thin woman. There's quite a lot of women around who are thin and deserve their chance of being released early as much as any man.
Fiona.
But just the final failure is to respond with common sense when the system doesn't work, and it's your fault, sorry, but it is ineptitude.
And Fiona,
and the result of this failure is a 70-year-old grandma in prison for Christmas.
Fiona, some will be listening and some will have been involved in those disruptions on the M25, and Gay was jailed for 20 months for participating in that Just Stop Oil protest that blocked the M25 back in November 2022. I remember reporting on it as well. Mm-hmm. People were angry, the disruption. So some might be listening and saying she deserves what she gets. What would you think to those views of people that don't quite get it and are quite upset and angry that they couldn't get to work or miss flights or whatever that day that your campaign group took to the roads?
Absolutely understandable. And yet, isn't it equally understandable that when you've engaged with what is actually happening to us all, i.e. climate breakdown, we're seeing it now, aren't we? The floods in Valencia, how disruptive were those? If you lived in Tenbury Wells and you were there a couple of weeks ago, you'd be mopping up the 7th flood in 4 years. How disruptive is all of that? So at some point, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, Just Stop Oil are doing this because what do you think we're doing it for? I'm a grandma too. And I watched what happened in Valencia. I watched what happened in Tenbury Wells, and it's coming closer, and it's going to happen to us all. There's a Valencia waiting to get us all, and we have to get our heads around it, and we have to push our government to take action, because at the moment our government is just
and Fiona, just lastly then, do you think that that Gay will be released before Christmas Day? Do you think that there'll be a U-turn, or do you think this is it, she's going back for Christmas and the government might have a rethink, the MOJ?
What I think they should do is to rethink the word justice. How can anybody say they're from a system that practices justice when they're putting a peaceful, elderly, ill woman in prison over Christmas because of their own ineptitude? How can that ever be described as justice? And this is a woman who was taking responsibility, who was taking an action in order to move a government to doing what they should be doing, which is protecting their citizens. This is about the failure to protect citizens. The least they could do now is to protect this particular citizen from their own ineptitude, i.e. not being able to come up with an electronic tag for someone who just happens to have thin wrists. It's outrageous.
Fiona Atkinson there from Just Stop Oil. Well, the Ministry of Justice said that under the home scheme, offenders must be under an electronically monitored curfew for at least 9 hours a day. A spokesman added, where it is no longer possible to electronically monitor offenders in the community through no fault of their own, they will be recalled until it is possible for them to be monitored in the community.